Greetings and welcome. It is Sunday and you have found the Soule of Wisdom. Congratulations, you're the big winner.
Yay!
My name is Dan. With me, as always, the off-camera God voice producer wife, Beth. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
I am great. So we always pick one topic on Sunday and kind of run with it. We thought it would be interesting this time to talk about the UAW, and I came up with 7 fun, fly, funky facts. That was all F words.
Yeah.
All right. About the UAW, and we went here because we've been talking a lot about labor and strikes and stuff like that. And specifically, we've done several spots on John Deere, and they're represented by the UAW. So we thought it would be fun to go out and learn a little more about the UAW. And then we discovered there was enough there to do a whole show. So let's do a show. Let's all learn something. I'm going to give you 7 interesting things about them that have kind of applied at various points in their history. This is not a chronological, boring kind of history of the UAW. It's just some facts and some fun. And Beth has not seen any of this.
Nope.
So she'll be the voice to ask questions or say that's really dumb or whatever.
Yeah.
Shall we?
Yeah.
Okay. Part 1, let's get the drier stuff out of the way first.
Yes.
As opposed to swecond. All right. Let's get the dry stuff out of the way first. Let's enunciate and talk about facts. So we have a baseline here. They were founded in 1935, the UAW was. But interestingly enough, I did not know this. They were initially an offshoot of the AFL.
Oh, that
They
I
were
didn't know.
not their own jam initially.
Okay.
They were part of that. Shockingly, where do you think they're headquartered?
Detroit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Weird, huh?
Yeah.
Since they are the United Auto Workers.
Yeah.
They have over 600 local branches now, 391,000 active members, but get this, 580,000 retired members.
That's a lot.
Yeah. So if you wonder why in their contracts they're always talking about, their retiree benefits and stuff like that, that's because they represent more people who don't work now than people that actually work.
Yeah.
That actually shocked me, but it didn't, all at the same time. That was just interesting. They currently hold 1,150 workers' contracts.
Okay.
So that's a ton of contracts that
Yeah.
they take care of. And the union itself, so not the people that they represent, just the actual union, employs 1,600 workers.
It's a lot.
Yeah. So
There's some overhead.
It would seem there's some overhead.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. So those are the basic facts and figures. But let's talk a little bit about the beginning. This is part 2 here.
Okay.
The beginning of the UAW, because this was interesting to me to kind of read through, and I'm going to kind of break down how it all got started. Initially, in the auto industry, there was not any unionizing going on. And there were a couple of reasons for that. First of all, in the grand scheme of things, the auto industry at the time actually paid very well. So if you had a job working on one of Ford's lines or something like that, you were doing okay for yourself.
Yeah.
So there was the fear of losing that job if you started talking about organizing.
Yeah.
And it was a legit fear, too, because the various companies monitored people. Mm-hmm. Ford actually had something it called the quote-unquote service department that had absolutely nothing to do with service. It had everything to do with company security and monitoring for union activity and spying on meetings between employees and all of that sort of thing. Over, I believe it was a 3-year term, I think it was GM that actually spent $2 million.
Oh, wow.
And at the time, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
just on the service department activities.
Reconnaissance, yeah.
Yeah, so that was interesting. But, I mean, everything kind of moved along hunky-dory until 1929 came around, and we all know what happened there. Mm-hmm. Big stock market boom.
Yeah.
And that kind of ended all the fun for everybody. But somehow, GM managed to actually see a slight uptick during the Depression.
Okay.
But the somehow had a reason behind it. The first thing they did was they went through and slashed the prices on all their vehicles. So they made them affordable to those who might still have some money. They went and they got rid of any higher priced models. So they dumbed everything down and slashed the prices.
Yeah.
And then they also went through and laid off a huge amount of their workforce. So between all of those adjustments, they still managed to do okay for themselves, to the point where they were actually controlling 43% of the marketplace by the time the Depression was in full swing.
Wow.
So that's huge. That's a big percentage for one company to do. And as things got busier, they actually started hiring back some of their older employees that they laid off initially, but they hired them back at lower wages.
Yeah.
Where have we seen that before?
Yeah.
Just between you and me, we've seen that before.
Yeah.
And they started speeding up their production lines. So they hired them back, they paid them less, and they made them work harder.
Yep. Do more.
Which, kind of started sowing some seeds of discontent.
Yes.
Well,
That'll piss people off.
Yeah, exactly. So while all of this was going on, Congress was also working on something called the National Labor Relations Act. And that got done in 1935. And that made it so that any worker had the right to organize and unionize in the United States. Now, it still left it up to states as to whether or not they could be a right-to-work state, meaning if they declared themselves as right to work, you didn't have to join the union. But nobody in the United States could prohibit union activities from happening anymore. So the whole idea of the strike busting and the firing people when they were talking about unions and things like that, that just wasn't going to fly anymore, couldn't do it. Okay? Mm-hmm. Well, this is when, right then, is when the UAW got formed. And specifically with GM, they started just real quietly, kind of behind the scenes, talking with workers there and starting to organize and whatnot, right? Well, in Flint specifically, at the Fisher Auto Body plant, word got out, because remember, they had their networks of spies and informants and everything else.
Yeah.
Well, word got out that they were planning something. And what they were planning was that they were going to wait until December of 1936 when they got their Christmas bonus. And then right when it turned into January, they were going to strike at that plant. And that was going to be the UAW's first big move, right? Well, again, word got out and GM figured it out. So one day the workers came in and they noticed that all their equipment, their good stuff, was getting loaded onto trains and was being shipped out. Because GM is okay, if they're going to do this, we'll just start doing this someplace else. So, and this was before Christmas when this actually happened. So they didn't make it to their planned time when they were all going to strike. And of course they were trying to wait for the bonus first. But
did they get the bonus?
Well, no. Because what happened was they decided that day that they would just strike right then. But they had to do something drastic because, they were removing the equipment and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So what they ended up doing was they did a sit-down strike where they literally just sat down in the plant and wouldn't leave. They wouldn't work either. So they sat around, they read the newspaper, they played ping pong, threw a ball around, stuff like that. Just refused to leave the place. And this went on for some time until GM went to the courts and got an injunction to get them out. And they won that injunction. However, they also realized that this started to get some press. So they realized if they used force to get these workers out, they were going to look bad.
Yeah.
So they decided on a 16-degree day that they just cut the heat to the plant.
Nice.
And the idea was, well, that'll get them to go home. Well, it didn't. The workers went outside to complain, and they decided while they were outside to start throwing bolts and stuff at security and police that were out there.
Oops.
So security and police countered with tear gas. And they had what they called the Battle of the Running Bulls. They went back and forth for a while, but eventually the police ended up retreating, and the workers went back inside, and the whole thing continued. So that got to the point where the governor, whose name was Frank Murphy at the time, who was actually like labor friendly, the governor said, this isn't going to fly, I need to send the National Guard. So he sends the National Guard out into Flint, but to his credit, he does not use them to get rid of the workers. He uses them as a peacekeeping force to kind of keep the workers from doing stupid things and to keep the local police and security from doing stupid things. And then FDR got involved, and he's like, hey, GM, you need to negotiate with these people. And it ended up that by I believe it was the 11th of February in 37, so this was like 45 or so days in, they finally got a deal done. And then the workers walked out all happy, and a short time later, production continued.
Surprised they didn't start little bonfires inside the factory.
Oh, they probably did.
Yeah.
That wasn't part of the reading, but it wouldn't surprise me if they did.
If there's no machinery around, and those factories are huge.
Yeah. But this was a big deal for GM because it wasn't just it started at Flint, right?
Yeah.
And later we're going to learn about one of the guys who was involved. You're going to love this one. This one will shock you. But the strike had actually spread to 17 of their plants by the time this thing was really in full swing.
It's a lot.
So it was kind of a big deal and kind of a problem for them, and just an absolute PR nightmare.
Yeah.
But that is really where the UAW had its first big hurrah right there. And at that point, as they emerged from that, they were officially represented by the UAW. And the UAW began to spread really fast at that point.
Yeah.
Because they kind of showed that they could get stuff done.
Yeah.
Right?
Power in numbers.
Exactly. Which leads us to point number 3 to bring up of our 7. And this is the fact that Ford wasn't playing. Ford, like I said, they had what they called the service department.
Yeah.
That's what they called their little security force. And they took it a step further. They actually went into full-on intimidation. Where, you wouldn't want something to happen to your kids, right? And,
Yeah.
Allegedly. And stuff like that.
Yeah.
So.
Good times.
Yeah. So in May of 37, so just a couple of months after this stuff went down in Flint, right? Mm-hmm. They had what they called what was it called? Oh, yeah, the Battle of the Overpass. That's what they called it. Okay. And this was, again, May of 37, and this happened at the River Rouge Ford plant. And Walter Reuther was the leader of the UAW at the time, and he actually led it right up until, I believe it was 71. He was killed in a plane crash. So he led it for a good long time.
Yeah.
And he'd made a plan that he was going to distribute these leaflets that said something to the effect of unionism, not Fordism. And he was going to distribute them at shift change up on this pedestrian bridge. There was this bridge that you had to go over to get into the factory from the parking lot, right? Mm-hmm. So he was going to be up there with his team, and he was going to hand out these leaflets to try to get this plant more and more of a union-friendly kind of situation. But again, Ford very resistant. Well, a local reporter got news of this and went in to talk to him and take pictures and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
Well, he was posing, him and his buddy Richard Frankenstein was his name. Well, the two of them were posing up on this bridge with a big Ford sign behind them for this photographer. A whole bunch of goons from the Ford service department come up from behind and just start beating the crap out of both of them.
Oh, wow.
Which led to more and more people fighting. And they figure that as many as 40 people began that attack, as many as 40 from the service department, though the exact number is still disputed. But it was messy and it was bloody, and one worker actually ended up with a broken back
Oh, wow.
from the beatings. But somehow, Ford still managed to, maybe it's because they intimidated him so badly that day, I don't know. Somehow, Ford still managed to resist any unionization until 41.
Wow.
So they still got 4 more years out of that where they had this battle back and forth, and then they finally capitulated.
Interesting.
That was really interesting to me, yeah. The fact that somehow they managed to resist it for so long. But, you know, in the same respect, though, the auto industry had a lot of shady stuff going on. What was the one movie we watched recently with Don Cheadle in it?
Oh,
I don't remember the name of it.
I don't either.
Well, it's on HBO Max. Go watch it if you can find it. It's cool. But it's based in historical fact about how, I believe it was GM had sent out plans for this constant variable transmission, but they were like fake plans. And another company got it and tried to copy it. And yeah, the whole thing was just crazy. But they did stuff like that. So the fact that they would kind of be behind the scenes messing with these workers isn't all that surprising. So anyways, I found that part interesting. So shall we move on to part 4?
Yeah.
Okay. Part 4 will shock you. It shocked me for this reason. So after 37, and by the time we get to 41, what else is starting in 1941?
The war.
World War II.
Yeah.
Well, it's already been going on, but the
Yeah.
U.S. gets involved with Pearl Harbor and everything. And one of the first things that happened was the UAW actually made a commitment that they would not strike in any place as long as the war was going on.
Okay.
That actually shocked me a little bit.
Yeah.
Because they'd been so aggressive and so kind of in your face about everything that they would actually make that agreement. Now, there was a bunch of UAW leaders that didn't like that, but they capitulated and went ahead along with it anyways. And yeah, there were no strikes, but they used the time for other things. Specifically, they started to organize themselves in airplane plants.
Ah, okay.
Because there was a lot of airplane production that was going on. So yeah, so while there was this like goodwill between everybody, they used that time to get their influence into other places as well. And then they used that influence 2 months after the end of World War II. The UAW struck at GM again for 113 days.
Wow.
And this time it was over power sharing. They wanted to have a say in management. And GM told them to buzz off. And eventually they ended up settling for a slight wage increase, but they never did get their power sharing. But they did keep their promise, but as soon as the war was over, let's move on.
Yep.
Right back to business as usual. So that was interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Did you find something?
I didn't. I wasn't able to quickly enough.
Oh, okay. I saw you were browsing. I figured you're looking for more information.
I was.
Okay. Well, onward. Any questions about anything so far, Bethy?
No.
Okay.
It's interesting.
It is. Well, this is why I wanted to do it, because I found some things that I didn't honestly know. And it's interesting because I grew up in Michigan, so the UAW was not anything weird to me. My mother worked in the automotive industry as an engineer, so it's not like I didn't understand what was going on, but my actual historical perspective on the UAW and kind of knowing some of their ins and outs, didn't really know it.
Yeah. I grew up in Toledo, and we have the Jeep plant, so also very similar.
Yeah, exactly. Which leads me to the next thing. Politics in the UAW. And that tie-in's going to be real clear in just a minute.
Yeah.
So, if you were to make a guess, Beth, which way does the UAW lean on the political spectrum?
I would 100% say Democrat.
Yes, that is very true. Especially with their leadership. Their leadership leans very left. Now, that tone was present at the beginning, and it continues through to today. If you go to the UAW's actual website, and I did that, and you look through some of their history materials, even the history materials are very left-leaning. Like when they get to the 80s, their materials talk about how awful Reagan was and stuff like that. And then when they get to the late 20-teens, they talk about how awful Trump was and things like that. But they praise Barack Obama, and they praise Clinton, and they praise LBJ and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So they're definitely left-leaning to be sure. But there's a reason for that. Guess what other party was incredibly active in the Union, especially at the very beginning?
Don't know.
The Communist Party.
Oh, okay.
Incredibly, incredibly active.
I guess that makes sense.
And actually, to prove that point, the Flint thing that we were talking about a couple of minutes ago,
Yeah.
and that sit-down strike.
Mm-hmm.
Guess who was brought in? Well, you wouldn't know who this is. There was a guy by the name of Bob Travis who was brought in to help that effort.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know who that is.
Guess what party Bob Travis belonged to?
Socialist?
The Communist Party. Guess where Bob Travis was from?
Russia?
Toledo.
Oh.
That's why I said it'll all
Oh, okay.
circle back. Yeah, he actually was from Toledo, and he was brought in and brought up to Flint to help out that situation.
Well, there's a lot of Eastern blockers that were in Toledo, so his ancestors could have been Russian.
No, that's very true. That is very true.
Yeah.
It's heavy Polish and everything else over there. So this wasn't like a complete controlling influence, but it was definitely an influence, and they were definitely pushing hard on things. Walter Rufer, the leader of the UAW, was accused often of being a communist, but that was never proven that he was. And there are claims that he was actually working behind the scenes to try to get rid of these people because he didn't like the look. So, you can debate whether or not he was or wasn't. Nobody will ever probably really know.
Yeah.
It's just a big argument. But the fact that there was this communist presence, especially in the UAW, brought Congress in 1947 to pass the Taft-Hartley Act.
Okay.
And that covered many things when it came to unions. But one of the biggest things it covered was an anti-communism provision. And specifically what that said, if you were at the leadership level of any union, you had to sign and stipulate on this waiver that you were not a communist, that you were not affiliated with the Communist Party, and you weren't affiliated with any group that was interested in overthrowing the government. So you had to attest to that.
Yeah.
At least until 1965, when the Supreme Court said that provision was unconstitutional and it got tossed out. But it did cause a lot of the leadership to then go and completely purge out the rest of the remaining communist influence at that point.
It's not like you can't lie on a test either, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. But the ones that they knew were communists, they tried to deal with it.
Yeah.
So that was interesting.
We'll catch them because they'll be honest.
Exactly.
It's just funny.
Yeah. So for point number 6, I tried to look for things where the UAW had an influence that was actually kind of more like a leadership role as far as how contracts would be done everywhere.
Okay.
Okay. And what I found was where they had the most influence was actually with pensions. So a lot of the pension plans and stuff that became so popular really kind of took root in the UAW and then blossomed out from there. So this came about in 1949. That National Labor Relations Act also created the National Labor Relations Board, and they were the ones who were responsible with enforcing the actual act, right? Mm-hmm. Well, as with everything, when you have laws, they're open to interpretation. So the board would often interpret, well, what's the meaning of this or that? In 1949, they interpreted that a company would be forced to collectively bargain with a union with regard to pensions.
Okay.
So it forced them to the table on this matter if the union wanted to go there. Well, of course they wanted to go there.
Yeah.
So what was the first thing that Walter Rufer did? Called for a strike. Because that's what they do.
Yeah.
So he called for a strike for Ford workers. He called for them to vote on it, and they agreed. So they all went on strike. And that went on for several weeks, and then Ford eventually ended up agreeing to pay $67.50 a month in pensions for anybody who worked at least 30 years for the company. Now, that went with the Social Security amount at the time, which was $32.50. So it made for an even $100 a month, which in today's money would be about $1,160.
Okay.
Okay. So 24 hours after that went down, Congress said, uh-oh, and they ended up passing an increase in Social Security. One of the reasons that pensions were a big deal for the UAW was that for years at that point, Social Security was stagnant. It wasn't like rising at all with cost of living or anything like that. Mm-hmm. So it kind of gave them an in to look at this, especially when the board said you have to negotiate on this matter. So Congress went and passed this increase, and the reason is all the business lobbyists from all the other industries all got in there and said, you need to raise Social Security or we're going to end up having to do this too. So they did. And then GM came around, and this was after actually a strike that Chrysler did. The next thing was Chrysler. They struck for a little over 100 days, and then they finally got on board with the same thing Ford did. And then GM came around, and they changed the game a little bit, and they said, okay, we'll do this, but we want to do it different. And they did $1.50 per month for every year that you worked. And that was, again, up to 30 years. So it ended up being a little bit less a month, but Congress had then raised Social Security up to $72 a month. Mm-hmm. So between the two, they ended up getting $117, which in today's math is about $13.50. So about $200 more a month at GM than what the others were getting. So those negotiations then started to ripple through the rest of the auto industry. And then it started going through the rest of all other industries. And within a decade or two, that was like the big thing in all the contracts, like everywhere. Was pension stuff. So they kind of launched all that. Now, it also ended up being the downfall, too, because when we got to the recession in 2008 and the car companies had to have their bailout and everything, one of their biggest problems as soon as sales slowed down was all their carrying costs from the pension plans.
Yeah.
So, eventually it ended up biting them in the butt. And, that you could do a whole other video on that disaster. And maybe someday we will. But yeah, that's how it all got started with pensions.
Interesting.
It was interesting. Shall we learn something different?
Sure.
Final item. Well, there's two little tiny bonus items after this one.
Okay.
But this was really interesting to me, so I wanted to share it. And this is different people that the UAW represent that aren't in automotive.
Okay.
And I found this really interesting because they are the United Auto Workers.
Yeah.
Well, they are, except if you are represented by Local 9. In that case, it's Milwaukee, and you are a Miller Coors Brewing worker.
Interesting.
Local 19 in Wyoming, Michigan represents the Grand Rapids Township firefighters.
Okay.
Local 1979 represents Detroit professional and administrative workers at Wayne State University.
All right.
Local 2110 represents workers at Columbia, NYU, and Barnard College.
All right.
Local 2320 in Atlanta represents the Food Research Action Center.
Never even heard of it.
Neither have I, but apparently it's a research center on food.
Okay.
And they are represented by the UAW. 2325 in New York City represents the Association of Legal Aid Workers. So they have some people in the law profession. Mm-hmm. My personal favorite, Local 2415 in Puerto Rico, represents workers at Bacardi Rum.
Nice.
Yes.
I guess that's not a huge jump, though, if there's, also taking care of people who work at the beer manufacturer.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's interesting. It's got nothing to do with cars.
No.
You're not supposed to drink and drive.
No.
So. Interesting.
Yeah.
So Local 2865 in Berkeley represents academic student employees at Berkeley.
Okay.
So that's interesting. There's also similar locals in the University of Washington and Harvard that also represent student workers.
So they have a couple little branches going on.
Local 4100 represents those working in postdoctorals at Columbia. Also similar setups at the University of California, UConn, and NYU.
Interesting.
Local 3555, Las Vegas casino dealers, cage associates, and slot attendees. I had no idea that the UAW is representing half of Las Vegas.
Me neither.
But they are.
Yeah, that's a big chunk.
Well, it kind of makes a little bit of sense, I guess, because you can argue, the alleged connection between, like, the UAW and the mob.
Yeah.
Okay. But you can also argue the alleged connection between Las Vegas and the mob.
Yeah.
So I guess, they kind of know both sides.
Back then there was probably some mob influence going on in the breweries too, so.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. You could certainly argue those influence in most of these places, I guess.
Yeah.
But interesting, there are other similar arrangements in other casinos around the nation that are also represented by the UAW. And then my personal favorite, Local 6000, State of Michigan employees.
Okay.
They have the whole state. So isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're headquartered there, so.
No, that's true. But still, I was surprised to see that they had the entire state of Michigan employees. That was interesting. Shall we have a couple bonus facts?
Sure.
These don't particularly fit anywhere, but they were interesting to me. So, true or false, Beth? The United Auto Workers established and ran its own television station.
Oh, it's just bizarre enough. I'm going to say true.
False.
Oh, okay.
Okay, but they did establish their own radio station.
Oh, okay.
WDET started out in Detroit in 1948, and it was a public broadcast station that was meant to talk to its workers at the UAW plants around the Detroit area.
Okay.
So it was used to communicate information and stuff like that to them. Well, that was until 1952, and the station was handed over for $1 to Wayne State University, and they've run it ever since. Although Wayne State has something like the Walter Reuther Institute or something like that, so I mean they still have like these heavy UAW ties.
Yeah.
But yeah, I found that interesting. They just founded a radio station so they could talk to people.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And then the other interesting thing, fact number 2, that really didn't fit anywhere, but it was interesting. In 1970, we had the first ever Earth Day.
Okay.
The UAW was the largest financial backer of that.
Okay.
They put all the money into the advertisement, into the idea, into the everything. The quote from the people who ran the first Earth Day said if it wasn't for the UAW, they never would have had it. So I found that interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah. So did we learn something today?
Definitely.
Okay. What was your favoriteest fun fact? The communist from Toledo?
That or the Earth Day thing, honestly.
Yeah, the Earth Day thing was weird.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the tie-in there is, but...
Look over here, not at all the pollution we're causing and everything else.
All right. See, this is why I bring Beth along. She just cuts right to it.
That's my guess.
So what was one thing you already knew?
There's a lot of that I didn't know. I definitely didn't know all of the other groups and associations that they backed. I knew they were headquartered in Detroit.
Yeah. Yeah, I knew some of the facts, figures, basics kind of stuff, but reading some of the history of the couple little battles that they had was interesting to me, and realizing just how much they've grown beyond the actual auto industry was interesting as well.
Yeah, I knew there was some intimidation and all of that in the beginning.
Yeah.
That was common in a lot of places, not just in like unions.
Yeah.
Just with bigger companies and their workers, that was common.
Yep. So yeah, none of that was shocking to me either, but it was good to learn. So hopefully, dear listeners, you got something out of this today and you enjoyed it. Again, we wanted to kind of give a little bit of a perspective on what the UAW is and what they do and what they have done, because they are coming up in discussion, but we didn't want to bore you with just a straight timeline of history either.
Yeah.
So we tried to pull out some fun stuff and hopefully you enjoyed that. If you did enjoy it, please do hit the like button. Go ahead and subscribe, hit that notification bell so you can see the other wonderful things that come out. These are, of course, if you are on YouTube. If you are on Rumble, hit the little punchy thing. because we like punchies on Rumble.
Yep.
If you are on the podcast side, please do leave us a review if your podcast provider allows for such things. Wherever you're finding us, please do share our content. That is the biggest thing that helps us get out in front of other people.
Yep, and they can email us.
They can email us. Yes, they can. If you have questions on what we talked about today or more information that you'd like to share, questions@soulewisdom.com. That is SOULE wisdom.com. We will read your question on air as long as it is not laced with profanity, in which case please don't hit the send button.
Yeah.
That is all we ask. You can also visit us online at soulewisdom.com. There you will find links to all of the businesses that we run. You will find all of our previous episodes, and you will also find our Teachable course. We have our first one up that is on running a successful Etsy shop, and more is on the way.
Yeah.
But certainly, especially this time of year, do us a favor, do yourself a favor, and visit our businesses.
Mm-hmm.
We have many good gifts.
We do.
We can help.
Yeah.
Anything else, Bethy?
No.
Thank you so much for talking to us. Well, if you email us, you'll talk to us. We talk to you.
Yeah.
Thank you for letting us talk to you. Thank you for listening to us. And we will see you tomorrow on Monday's show.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.